if you don't mind sharing, what kind of seller financing strategies are available?
Yeah, I would categorize these as sort of 4 main ones.
Okay.
Well, 4 big ones.
Okay.
And 2 that are mostly used here in Utah.
Okay.
So the first one, I'll just give an example. This is a situation where the seller will actually partner with the buyer on the property. This is usually a situation where maybe the house is a little run down, can't really sell on the retail market. Maybe there's some issues with the house that need to be corrected, and the seller doesn't have money to fix the problems to be able to sell it on the open market.
Got it.
It could be the deal that I just recently did was there was a sewer crack out at the street. So it was a $15,000 fix.
Got it.
Seller does not have $15,000.
Right.
But there was some equity in the house, so he certainly didn't want to unload the house super cheap to a real estate investor looking for a profit.
Right.
So just selling it to an investor wouldn't work, selling on the retail market wouldn't work. So we went in with a solution of partnering with the seller. And so the seller had a place to move. Temporarily, so we partnered with the seller. We did not, as an investor, we didn't buy the house. We didn't own the house.
Yeah.
We had no mortgage in our name. We had no financing in place at all, other than the underlying mortgage that we did take over.
Okay.
They were super cheap, so we would pay the underlying mortgage.
Okay.
Went in with about $25,000.
Okay.
Repaired the sewer, which was the main thing. And then we did paint and carpet.
Nice.
Because other than that, the house was fairly decent shape, but it did need paint and carpet. We painted the cabinets. So about a $10,000, $8,000 remodel, aside from the sewer line. And then we split the profits.
Nice.
So originally the seller probably would have netted, if he sold it on the MLS, he could have.
Yeah.
Even if he had the $15,000 to repair the sewer, he would have made maybe $10,000 on the open market.
Gotcha.
But because we were able to fix the sewer and fix it up and spruce it up,
increase the price.
He actually made about $30,000.
Wow.
So he made more profit, and I made $30,000. So
Nice.
I got my money back, the $25,000 I put in, and made $30,000.
Fantastic.
So the seller made more money, I made money. It was a 2-month little flip.
Yeah.
And it was a way to make that transaction work for both of us. And that was the key, is you solve the seller's problems. Right? In a way that is financially beneficial to both of you.
Right. It's win-win.
So it's win-win.
Yeah.
And so
3 times his profit.
Yeah, and so that looks like maybe just, maybe I partnered on a flip, but because I was partnering with the seller had the mortgage in place, so that kind of allowed us to get in and remodel the house. That really is a type of seller financing transaction, is partnering with the seller.
Gotcha.
Okay, so that is an option.
I love it, because then you eliminate the hard money costs.
Oh yeah, which is a big one. For an investor, hard money costs are very expensive.
Exactly.
And so, a lot of investors think, when they're thinking seller financing on the buyer side, they're thinking, hey, I can get this property, I don't have to qualify for a mortgage, and I'm going to turn it into a rental. That's kind of the standard thinking with seller financing. I'm going to carry this seller's mortgage at a cheap interest rate instead of a non-owner occupied mortgage, which is a much higher interest rate. And it's a great deal as a rental property. But you can do these on flips. Short-term flips. And save those hard money costs.
Exactly. Yep. That's the seller financing transactions I've done have been flip ones.
Okay.
I kept the mortgage in place. I didn't have to pay hard money. I went in, remodeled it, flipped it, and then when we sold it, paid out the underlying mortgage, and then of course.
It's fantastic.
Exactly. Great. Okay. So perfect.
So that's one way. Is just partner with the seller, work out some kind of deal or joint venture with the seller.
Got it. Okay.
The second way, I'm going to kind of go in reverse order now.
Okay.
The second way I want to mention is contracts for deeds.
Okay.
In some states, these are used almost exclusively in real estate transactions.
Got it.
They're not really used here in Utah.
Okay.
It's just never been a thing. You do occasionally see them. I've used them on some short-term projects. They do have some issues that arise that can be difficult to resolve. And if you try one of the other methods, you don't even run into problems at all. So I've never seen kind of a reason to go that route, other than some very rare exceptions. With certain, if Utah Housing Authority loan, for example, is staying in place, they're pretty aggressive at calling the due on sale clause.
Gotcha.
But other than that, it is an option that I discuss with clients, but not used very often.
Okay.
So there's a second. The third is lease options.
Oh, okay.
Which you wouldn't think of as seller financing, but it is still, again, it's a way for a buyer to get possession of a house, use of a house, control of a house
Yeah.
with not owning it.
Right, and potentially buying it.
And potentially buying it.
Yeah.
So the investor or the buyer leases from the owner
Yeah.
with an option to buy sometime in the future.
Right, like probably rent to own is a more common term people have heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like that term because the way it's structured does have to be sort of different. The rent to own can be a little ambiguous.
Gotcha.
Right? So the buyer will sign a lease agreement and an option to buy, so let's say 2 years down the road.
Got it.
And the rent to the seller is $1,000 a month.
Yes.
Then the investor will turn around and lease it out to a retail renter
Yeah.
who maybe wants to rent to own or eventually get into the house. And the rent that you charge to that person is $1,200 a month.
Right.
So the investor's going to sit there for 2 years collecting $200 a month cash flow.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the 2 years, that buyer will step in and buy the house from the seller.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Now that can get a little tricky.
Yeah.
Just depending on how it's structured.
Sure.
But I think it's a phenomenal tool. There's no purchase, there's no closing costs. You generally do not need to get a loan. The underlying mortgage stays in place.
Yep.
It's a rental situation.
So there's no foreclosure if you don't. Right.
Yeah, there's no due on sale clause.
Right.
Right. Yeah, and then if your tenant that you've leased out to, breaches their lease, you just evict them and you get a new tenant.
Exactly.
Right? And you can even collect deposits, option fees
Right.
for the right to buy it. 5, 10, 15, I've seen even $40,000 option fees.
Right.
And if that tenant then breaches the lease agreement and you evict them, you keep the $40,000 option fee, get another tenant who's going to pay you another option fee.
Right.
So I would say it's a little bit of a complicated deal, and you're sitting in the middle. So you do have a seller that's still involved, and a mortgage, and your retail tenant buyer.
Yeah.
So it is definitely, I'd say, an intermediate to advanced kind of real estate investment technique, but it's a fantastic one.
Yeah, and just to elaborate a little more, that would be a sandwich lease option. You could hypothetically, let's say you own the property, you could just lease option it out, and then there's only 2 parties versus 3.
Yeah, if you had a rental that you normally just rented out long term, you could, with your tenants, sign a lease option agreement.
Right.
And have them kind of in a rent to own situation and not deal with the seller.
Exactly. And in my experience, if you're comfortable with the house potentially selling, you actually make more money on a lease option, monthly payments, a bigger deposit than on a traditional rental. And then if they don't execute the right to buy, you keep it and you do it again, and now you've made even more money on the next guy.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because it's a premium to be able to have an opportunity
and the
to buy.
investors that do this do make pretty good money.
Right.
When I do talk to clients, you have to be aware that option fee is what the investors are looking at.
Exactly.
Like, holy cow, if I collect $20,000 option fee for the right to buy this house in 2 years, and some reason they either breach their lease or they can't buy the house in the 2 years. They can't fix their financing or their credit or their down payment.
Right.
Right? They do lose that option fee.
Right.
But if it's a big amount, you can expect that tenant to try and fight it somehow. Which is why your documentation and your structuring has to be really, really critical.
Yes.
Because very few tenants are going to walk away from $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 simply because they couldn't buy enough. Even though that's what they signed, even though the contract says you're going to lose the money, they're not going to walk away quietly usually in those big numbers.
Exactly.
So it is something you need to be prepared for, and that's why I say it's an intermediate. Because there is an issue that could arise.
Yes, I have seen as high as 40,000. Not mine. I would say, from my experience, I'd like to hear this because you've probably seen way more. I usually see 3% of the agreed purchase price if one executes the purchase. So on a $300,000 home, it's $9,000 versus $40,000. What do you see mostly?
I would say I see mostly in the range of $10,000 to $25,000. Seems to be pretty standard.
Okay.
If it's a lower priced home, maybe under $200,000, it might be a $5,000 option fee.
Gotcha.
But on a standard average price home in the Salt Lake Valley, which is now, what, 310? Something like that? Is that in the 300s, 340?
Yeah. Median was 390.
The median's even 390.
Salt Lake County.
Salt Lake County. Yeah. So it's I've seen the 10 to 25,000 option fees.
Gotcha.
Pretty straight across the board.
Got it. Now, if you're a buyer and you're putting 20,000 as a fee, as a deposit, and you execute and you actually buy, that's a great opportunity for you because you didn't have to get a traditional loan. That's better than 20% down. You know what I mean? So it's definitely advantageous for both parties, especially if you execute as a buyer.
Right.
So, okay, cool.
Yeah. So then the fourth way.
Yes.
Okay. Which is the most common. So that's
Okay.
why we're ending with the fourth. The fourth way is the way when real estate investors or even homeowners think of seller financing. This is the one they're thinking about.
Got it.
This is the situation where the seller actually does sell the house in a closing. The buyer buys it, they close, they record title, the buyer takes title, the buyer's the owner.
Yep.
Okay? But in some way, the seller has helped finance the purchase.
Gotcha.
Through a note and deed or an all-inclusive note and deed. Or some other financial arrangement.
Yeah.
And so the seller literally becomes a bank.
Right.
Nothing more. Not an owner of the house, not a landlord like in a lease option, but an actual bank.
Right.
And the owner gets a monthly payment.
Right.
On interest, with interest of what they've loaned to the buyer.
Yes.
And no money, the neat great thing here is no money changes hands.
Got it, yeah.
The seller doesn't give the buyer the $200,000 to buy the house.
Right.
Because the seller had that in equity.
Yeah.
Or even equity in debt. And so the seller, no money changes hands. The seller's just taking some of his equity, instead of taking the cash now and possibly paying capital gains tax on it, he's actually financing his equity to the buyer and earning interest on top of that. So the seller will actually make more money in the long run.
Right. Yeah.
And I call that traditional seller finance, or sometimes note and deed seller financing. And there's 3 or 4 ways to structure even that kind of deal.
Got it.
Depending on whether there's an underlying mortgage, whether it's a note and deed or an all-inclusive note and deed.
Right.
So that just gets down kind of the details of the actual transaction. But they're all sort of variations on a theme of the seller becomes a bank.
Gotcha.
In some way.
Gotcha. And probably the cleanest for a seller, right? Because
it is the cleanest.
They don't have to worry about anything.
And if a seller doesn't want to be a landlord, because there are risks, right, with being a landlord.
Absolutely.
Even though the buyer is sort of responsible for subleasing and all that. You got to negotiate that with the seller. And some sellers are like, I don't want the worry of having tenants in the house and what might happen. So some sellers might be skittish on the lease option side. And this one, literally, when you become a bank, that's one of the most secure positions you can be in a real estate transaction. Yeah. Because banks have written all our laws. Yeah. And banks win every time. Right. So if you're in a position of a lender, you have the right of foreclosure. Right. And it's really difficult to challenge a foreclosure if someone is in default on a loan. Exactly. And so you just foreclose, you take the house back, including everything you've already received. Yeah. Possibly. Yeah. So, and a foreclosure in Utah, because we're a trustee state, is rather straightforward. It doesn't even require a court. Oh. You file some documents, you post it in the newspaper, and then you take it at an auction. Gotcha. Yeah, very. And what's great about that too is you don't have to fix it. Like, you don't call Zion's Bank and go, hey, there's a leak in my roof, right? Like, you want a landlord. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so if you were a bank. Yeah, you don't care what's happening to the rent and the renter and the problems and the issues with the house and possible slip and falls and leaky faucets on 9 o'clock on a Friday night that the landlord has to go fix. Right. You just sit back and you collect your monthly payment. If you don't collect your monthly payment, you foreclose. Yep. Just like Bank of America would do. Yep. Perfect. Okay. Love it. All right, guys. So we are going to cut to a quick commercial break. When we come back, it's the nightmare story time. With all these great opportunities, as Jeff talks about, if you don't structure it right, well, you can find yourself in a nightmare. But we'll get you out of it. Yes. And Jeff and I do a podcast as well called Deals A to Z. And we actually did 8 episodes where we interviewed, 8 specific episodes where we interviewed 8 specific seller financing investors. We've done more than 8 episodes, but 8 where we blocked away and interviewed these investors. And they shared the good and the bad, and I think Jeff has a story that he's going to share. I don't know if I've heard it yet, but I'm excited to hear it. Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, awesome. So we will cut to commercial break. You're not going to want to go anywhere because you will definitely want to know what could happen if it's done wrong.